I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing. I was born with the evil one standing as my sponsor beside the bed where I was ushered into the world, and he has been with me since.
He said it like it was a fact. Not a confession, not an excuse. Just the truth, as he saw it. Before the murder castle, before the name H.H. Holmes struck fear, he was just a boy named Herman Webster Mudgett, but something wasn't right from the start. Herman was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire on May 16, 1861, to a deeply religious Methodist family. His father, Levi, was a violent alcoholic. His mother, Theodote, was cold, obsessed with sin and punishment. They raised their son to fear hell, but perhaps it was already inside him. Even as a child, Herman was different. Intelligent, quiet, calculating. He was obsessed with anatomy, and there are disturbing accounts of him dissecting animals for fun, not for science, for control. And then there's the rumor, unconfirmed but persistent, that a local boy vanished after playing with young Herman near an abandoned house. No body, no charges, but a lifetime of whispers. One day, bullies dragged him into a doctor's office and forced him to look at a real human skeleton. They thought it would traumatize him. But instead, Holmes later claimed he liked it, that it cured his fear of death and made him want to master it, a moment that may have planted a seed, twisted and growing. As a teen, he conned his way through life. At the University of Michigan's medical school, Holmes found a way to turn the dead into dollars. He and a classmate stole corpses from the lab, mutilated them, faked accidents, then collected the insurance money. To Holmes, death wasn't tragic, it was useful. By the time he left Michigan, he changed his name, reinvented himself, and soon he'd build a home designed not for living, but for dying. Next time, we follow Holmes to Chicago and into the walls of America's most infamous house of horrors. It looked like a hotel, but it was built like a trap. In Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, just blocks from the fairgrounds, stood the three-story monstrosity that the papers would later call the Murder Castle. Designed by Holmes himself, the building was a twisted puzzle, filled with hidden rooms, dead-end hallways, and staircases to nowhere. On paper, it was a hotel. In reality, it was a custom-built slaughterhouse. There were rooms with soundproofing, gas lines, steel bolts that locked from the outside. Bodies were dropped through hidden chutes into the basement below, where Holmes could experiment, dissect, and destroy. Some bodies were sold to medical schools. Others were reduced to ash. Holmes claimed 27 murders. Investigators suspected it was far more. Some believe the true number was over 200. And the timing wasn't coincidence. During the 1893 World's Fair, thousands flooded to Chicago. He preyed on the lost, the curious, the invisible, and the castle was built to make them vanish. But what if the castle was only part of the story? What if Holmes's trail of death didn't begin in Chicago? In 1888, London's East End was paralyzed with fear. A killer stalked the foggy streets of Whitechapel, brutally murdering women and vanishing into the night. The world came to know him as Jack the Ripper. But more than a century later, a shocking theory emerged. What if the Ripper was an American? Jeff Mudgett, the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes, uncovered disturbing secrets about his ancestor, one of America's earliest and most terrifying serial killers. In his book Bloodstains, Jeff reveals he found personal journals and letters passed down to the family that hinted Holmes had traveled to England at the exact time of the Ripper murders. Jeff even claims Holmes confessed, within those pages, to committing murders in London. He believes Holmes was more than a con man and a killer. He believes he was the Ripper. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence is hidden in ink, handwriting. A forensic analysis compared the Dear Boss letter signed by Jack the Ripper to verified documents written by H.H. Holmes. The similarities? Striking. Word spacing, slant, loop patterns, and letters. Not identical, but disturbingly close. Enough to raise serious questions. Could Holmes have written those infamous Ripper letters? According to Jeff Mudgett's research, a ship manifest lists a man using one of Holmes' known aliases traveling to the UK in mid-1888, right before the Ripper killings began. Even more suspicious, another document shows someone under that same alias returning to the US shortly after the Ripper's last known victim was murdered. Did Holmes slip into London, commit an unspeakable crime, and vanish without a trace? H.H. Holmes, a trained doctor, a man who's dissected cadavers in college and was known for experimenting with bodies later in life. If the Ripper was a surgeon, Holmes fits that bill all too well. Of course, not everyone agrees. Critics argue that there is no confirmed record of Holmes being in London during the murders, and some of the Ripper letters, possibly even the Dear Boss note, may have been hoaxes written by journalists or attention seekers. But the overlap in time, the handwriting, the travel logs, the confessions in Holmes's alleged journals, for believers is a puzzle that fits all too well to ignore. If H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper were one and the same, he wouldn't just be America's first serial killer, he'd be one of history's most elusive and global murderers. Two cities, one shadow. What do you believe? Next time on Murdered History, I'll leave behind the theories and focus on the facts. Who are H.H. Holmes' known victims? What really happened to them? And how many were there, truly? History remembers the monster, but we remember the names. These are the known victims of H.H. Holmes. Many of Holmes' victims were young women lured into Chicago with the promise of jobs at the World's Fair, or within Holmes' pharmacy, hotel, or various shell companies. Among them was Julia Smythe Connor. She and her daughter Pearl vanished after Julia became romantically involved with Holmes. Emmeline Segrand, another young woman who worked in his building, disappeared in 1892. Witnesses say she went into Holmes' office. She was never seen again. Minnie Williams believed she was marrying Holmes. She signed over her property to him, and then, like her sister Nanny, they vanished without a trace. When authorities finally searched the so-called murder castle, they found bones, some human, some not. A piece of woman's dress, a child's footprint in the quicklime pit. Some remains were too far gone to identify, but the implication was clear. The castle had been a slaughterhouse. Beyond the castle, Holmes' greed left a trail of death. Dr. Russell and Mrs. Lawrence vanished after business dealings with him. Others, like Henry Walker and John Davis, were reported missing after financial entanglement with Holmes. In many cases, no remains were ever found, but the pattern was unmistakable. Holmes once claimed to have killed 27 people. Some people believe the number could be over 200, but only a few victims were ever confirmed. Each name is more than a headline. These were daughters, sisters, friends, forgotten only by time and only if we let them be. Next time on Murdered History, the story of Benjamin Peitzel, friend, accomplice, victim, and the children whose fate would shock the world. In 1894, H.H. Holmes made a promise, a lie wrapped in charm and sealed with betrayal. Benjamin Peitzel wasn't just an accomplice, he was a husband, a father, and desperate man trying to provide. Holmes convinced Peitzel to fake his own death for $10,000 life insurance payout. but Holmes had no intention of sharing that money. Instead of staging the death, Holmes murdered Benjamin with chloroform after knocking him unconscious and setting the scene to look like a lab explosion. To collect the money, Holmes needed Peitzel's widow, Carrie, to identify the body, but to keep her quiet and compliant, he lied. He told her Benjamin was alive and in hiding, and that she should let 3 of her children travel with him to be reunited. One by one, the Peitzel children vanished. Holmes moved them from city to city until they were never seen alive again. Howard was found buried in a cellar, burned, dismembered, and stuffed into a chimney. His sisters were buried together beneath the Toronto house. Carrie Peitzel had been following Holmes's instructions, city to city, believing she was one step closer to her husband and children. By the time she learned the truth, her family had already been destroyed. Holmes didn't just murder Benjamin Peitzel, he murdered a family. Not for rage, not for revenge, but for profit. But even behind bars, Holmes kept lying. He boasted of 27 murders, claimed he was possessed by Satan, and to anyone who'd listen, he told a different story every time. Next time on Murdered History, we open the prison gates and dive into the madness Holmes called his truth. By the time H.H. Holmes sat in a jail cell in Philadelphia, his web of lies had already begun to unravel, but Holmes wasn't done talking. In fact, he was just getting started. From behind the bars, he spun tales, rewrote his past, and tried to control the story, even as investigators closed in with the truth. Holmes was arrested in Boston in November of 1894, not for murder, but for fraud. Authorities believed he had faked the death of Benjamin Peitzel to collect insurance money. They didn't know yet that the real horror was just beginning. Holmes was disturbingly composed. In prison, he was polite, charming, and calculated. Guards liked him, reporters loved him. He knew how to perform, and this was his new stage. From that cell, Holmes began crafting his greatest lie, the myth of a misunderstood man trapped by circumstances. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to newspapers, to lawyers, to anyone who would listen. Holmes couldn't keep his lies straight. One day he swore innocence, the next, he claimed responsibility for over 24 murders, and the next, he blamed mysterious accomplices, each story more dramatic than the last. While Holmes tried to rewrite his legacy from inside a cell, Detective Frank Geyer was writing a much different story, one based on truth. He was retracing Holmes' steps and uncovering horrors the world wasn't prepared for. Holmes tried to maintain control, but with each new body, each lie exposed, his confidence began to fray. His letters grew darker, his claims more unhinged. The monster was slipping through his own fingers. By the time the trial approached, Holmes was infamous. A man once admired for his intellect was now a spectacle. But the truth hadn't even been fully told yet. That would come next, in a courtroom that would make headlines around the world. Previously, we uncovered the chilling truth behind the Peitzel tragedy and Holmes' tangled webs of deception. But now the devil faces justice, at least the version the court was willing to hear. On July 19, 1895, H.H. Holmes stood trial in Philadelphia, not for the many crimes whispered in the dark, but for a single murder, that of Benjamin Peitzel. The trial was a media spectacle. Holmes, ever the showman, chose to represent himself, because of course he did. Prosecutors laid out a damning case, how Holmes murdered Ben with the chloroform and staged it as a suicide to cash in on a life insurance policy. But what truly buried Holmes were the testimonies. Detective Frank Geyer detailed his journey through the Midwest, uncovering the remains of Ben's children, each lie leading to another unthinkable truth. On October 28, 1895, after only a few minutes of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty, the devil was going to hang. From his prison cell, Holmes wrote and sold his so-called confession, 40-plus murders by his count, though no two lists ever match. But was it justice, or just a convenient conviction? Holmes' execution would end his life, but not his legend. On May 7th, 1896, America's first known serial killer was led to the gallows. But in true Holmesian fashion, death may not have been the end of his story. At Philadelphia's Moynihan prison, Holmes met his fate, calm and collected. He showed no fear. His final words: "Take your time, don't bungle it." The execution did not proceed smoothly. Holmes appeared to struggle longer than expected. Some saw this as poetic justice. Others began to question if it was truly him. Holmes prepared for his burial carefully. He purchased 2 adjacent grave plots and arranged to be buried in between them, 10 feet underground and inside a coffin cased in cement. There was no headstone, no identifying marker. The grave was discreetly placed between the 2 other plots, hidden from plain sight. However, discrepancies arose. The remains were taller than Holmes, the facial hair appeared thicker, and the teeth were well maintained, unlike Holmes' known dental issues. Some staff reported never seeing Holmes the morning of the execution. Others said the person on the platform kept their face turned away. Rumors circulated about a possible body substitution. In 2017, Holmes' grave was opened. The cement-encased coffin was unearthed, revealing preserved remains. Official DNA testing reportedly confirmed the identity, but Holmes' great-great-grandson, Jeff Mudgett, challenges these results. Jeff believes the DNA test was not conclusive and that the real Holmes may have escaped, with another individual buried in his place. Did Holmes meet his end in prison, or did he outsmart death yet again? Although buried deep beneath the earth, the question about his fate remains alive. Whether H.H. Holmes truly died that day, or slipped the noose and vanished into legend, one thing is for certain: the devil left bloodstains on American history. But just as the echoes of the gallows fade, the sound of an axe echoes through Fall River. With episode 8, we close the chapter on H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City, who may have slipped the noose but never escaped history's gaze. Thank you everyone for sticking with me through the first season. I'm taking a short break to recharge, but when I return, we'll dive into a new dark tale, one whispered in the shadows of the axe. Get ready for the next chapter, Lizzie Borden in the Shadow of the Axe.